What is up? What is up? All right, let's get some tunes rolling. First thing. Yeah? Oh, yeah, let's do this. All right, give people a couple of minutes to get signed on, logged in live. And pop the chat box out here too. What is up, people? Welcome in. Episode 4. Beautiful.
I'll take a cup of coffee.
If you're watching live, what's up?
I gotta get the
Leave
caffeine.
a little chat in the chat box.
I need it in my veins.
So you're out there
Before I go insane, I make a pot of coffee. I drink it in my dreams. Need it in my veins. Before I go insane. Some folks like mimosas, some like a Bloody Mary. I'll take a cup of coffee with lots of sugar and dairy. I'll take a cup of coffee.
Thumbs up. Yes. Love it. Welcome to Ask a Realtor, episode 4. Yes, we are rocking and rolling here. I'm your host, Joseph, eXp Realty, the realtor that you ask things of, and welcome to Ask a Realtor. We've got a couple of fun topics to dive into here. So let's get started right away. First one, I want to give a shout out to my man, Rich. He had a question for considerations when buying a property on a well. Well, that's a deep subject. Da-dun. All right, enough puns. We're gonna give you content, more content and less puns. So, when you're buying a property on a well, that is your source of water for that property, and those are typically going to be rural, not always, but it's important to know when you're looking at a property, considering buying a property, what the source of water is. In the state of Colorado, we have a source of water disclosure that goes along with every single transaction. And that's going to indicate if it's municipal water. If you're on a city tap, it's going to indicate who that water provider is, along with some contact information for them. This is to allow consumers to do their research, do their homework, make sure that they are comfortable with how they get water to that property. Water is a very, very big deal, really anywhere. So today we're going to well water. That's going to be water that is obtained from underground, a dug well. And the first thing that you want to look at when you're considering buying property with a well is, what is your intended use for that property? Are you going to be buying that property for the purpose of just a residence and only using water for household, maybe a small garden? Or are you going to actually want to irrigate that property and farm it for crops? And or are you going to have livestock on it that also needs water, right? So ask that question first and foremost. And then what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the well permit and take a look at what the well permit says, because that well permit might not permit your intended use. And that's important to know up front. If the well permit is only for water for household use and you wanted to do crops, guess what? That might not be the best property for you. Or you might need to look into alternative means to irrigate those crops. You might be looking at putting on what's called a cistern, which can be above or below ground, and it's a water tank. Then you're looking at tanking water in, trucking water in, every so often, every month, every couple of weeks, depending on your use and your capacity. So yeah, important to know up front what your source of water is, and if you're looking at a well property, you want to dive in and look at that permit. Um, some properties have a well on there, and if you don't have a well permit, then that might be an illegal well. That's not cool either. So you definitely want to make sure everything's on the up and up there, and that you don't run into issues with someone else having claims to that water, any of that stuff. If you're getting into water rights, I always highly recommend to my clients to actually hire a water rights attorney to review all the paperwork around that. Your realtor might have some information on it for you, but their knowledge base is going to be more surrounding the transaction itself, the buying and selling of real estate. You want to go to someone that specializes in those water rights, to get the most correct information. So good stuff there. But let's talk wells here. And actually, let me check in here and see if we've got some chats going on. Okay. Quiet tonight on the chats. That's cool. We're just getting started here. We got a lot to get into, so you're all good there. But appreciate you checking it out here. Let's keep rolling here. So when you buy a property on a well, there's different aspects to that well that you're going to want to get inspected. You're going to want to inspect that well for quality as well as quantity. And what do I mean by that? Quality, a well inspection, they're going to test water at the tap. They're going to send it into a lab and tell you what sort of minerals you have in that water, if there's contaminants in that water. Really important stuff to know, because if there are contaminants and it's a property that you really want to move forward on, but you can't use the water without doing something for it, it could be a costly fix, right? So in your inspection period, that's something that you would want to negotiate with the owner of that home that's selling it to you. Who's going to cover those costs of getting rid of those contaminants, right? But if you don't do this test and you buy the property and the water's making you sick, or you decide to do a test later and find out about it, or you hear from a neighbor, oh yeah, our well water, we had contaminants in there, we had to do this and that to correct it. Well, chances are good your neighbor's well is on the same aquifer that yours is. That would be the groundwater aquifer underneath all the properties in the area. So you're pulling from the same water. So good to know up front. Good to address up front and just make sure. There's things that you can do, post pump. You can put in a filtration system in the home. Recommend it. A lot of properties that I show and sell that have wells already have a filtration system, and that's something to check out too, just to make sure that it's all running and proper. And even if you see that, I would not forego the quality test. Still do your well inspection, even if you see a filtration system. That doesn't mean that it's working properly. That doesn't mean that it's not bypassed. You got to make sure that it's hooked up, working properly. Everything looks good in the water there. You have some good purity, right? Now, quantity. We want to know about GPM, gallons per minute. And also refer back to the well permit, which, by the way, well permits are going to be public record. You want to refer back to those, and also make sure, they might have a restriction on GPM, how many gallons per minute that well can put out, right? So that's another aspect that you want to check in. All right, sweet. We got A is on here. Is a well permit temporary, just for installation, or a permanent permit? Great question, my man. It's permanent. In fact, if you're buying a property and you're interested in putting a new well on the property, encourage you to check out if it's even possible on that property. Um, for properties in Colorado, for example, to obtain a new well permit, the lot needs to be a minimum of 35 acres. I'll say that again. For a new well permit in Colorado, the lot needs to be 35 acres or more for you to even apply for a new well permit on there. Now, there's plenty of properties out there under that amount that have existing well permits. Those are grandfathered in. Those obtained well permits in the past, and those permits are good into the future. And they're also grandfathered in. So you're permitted to have that well, even though that property is under the 35 acres. It's just when it comes to obtaining a new permit, then you've got to jump through certain hoops, one being lot size, minimum 35 acre in Colorado. And yeah, there's definitely going to be other requirements in other areas. And there can be other requirements based on the county that you're looking at too. So it's all real important. If you're looking at buying raw land for the purpose of putting a home on, you want to check that stuff out. Cool. Great question. And thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you, man. Awesome. All right. So we were talking about gallons per minute here. I pulled up a little cheat sheet here. So in most locations, it's required that the well produces 3 to 5 gallons per minute. Generally, a 3-gallon minimum is required for older homes. New homes, 5 gallons per minute. You can also have the flow rate and the yield of the well tested by professionals with the right equipment. And a professional well inspection will do just that. Just because a well has clean, safe drinking water does not mean that it contains enough water to meet the needs of your household. All right, awesome. And all right, how would anyone know that you're not using your well according to your permit? Well, well, do you see what I did there? That runs into a sticky situation. You might not get caught for a while. It might be if you're irrigating crops. Tell you what, if you're irrigating crops, you're going to be putting a much higher demand on the water in that aquifer, and your well might not even be able to keep up with it anyways. So if you're only pulling 3 to 5 gallons per minute and you're trying to irrigate crops, it just won't work. But short of that, if you're using it for livestock or anything like that, what we see in rural areas is sometimes neighbors. Sometimes if the property is located in an HOA, the association, um, might be able to check on that. So, but to your point, if you're doing it under the radar there, using it for a non-permitted use, just know that you would be assuming that risk of if you ever got busted, they would say, you know what, can't use the well for that purpose. And now they're going to look at you with a microscope. So cool. But some of the tests they do most often is a flow rate test. Flow refers to the amount of water coming from the well, and the flow rate measures the gallons per minute being dispersed. Average home needs 100 to 120 gallons per person per day, and a flow rate of about 6 to 12 gallons per minute. Requirement could be more if a large family is creating more water demand. So before you buy, it's important to know that the well will generate enough water, both flow rate and overall capacity, to meet the needs of your home for the long haul. Otherwise, you'll find yourself needing to drill another well or wait for the well to refill, which can take a long time. Drilling a new well, you'll find a new location on the lot and put an entirely new well system into the ground. The goal, of course, is to hit a good water source. Drilling a new well can be expensive. Costs can vary substantially. Determining factors include where you're located, conditions of soils, and how deep the well needs to be to generate a constant supply of water. How far down is that aquifer? How much rock, how much clay is in the soil? Those are all factors that go into well cost. Plan on spending anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 drilling a new well. And we've seen it where there's old wells that need to be capped off, and that's a requirement on the well permit too. So when you're drilling a new well, that's something to take into consideration as well. Check with the local water supplier and make sure what you can and cannot do with that well permit. Have your realtor look into it for you if you're considering buying the property, or if it's property that you already own and you're interested in doing, drilling a new well potentially. Then of course you can reach out to a realtor as a resource to help you out with that, or just reach right out to, like Colorado Water if you're here in Colorado. Cool. Awesome. Let's see here. What to do to fix well quality. When you have the well tested, you may discover certain contaminants that make it undesirable, like contaminants that affect the taste, smell, or texture of the water. Fortunately, there are many options available for dealing with such contaminants. It's not the end of the world if there's problems with the water. Talk with a professional who tests the well and see what options they are. Usually, they're going to have some good resources for you. Um, Almost any kind of well quality issues can be fixed with a proper filtering system. Some water treatment systems can eliminate several pollutants. There's not just one size fits all system for every application or water contaminant. So get it tested, find out what's in the water, and then find out what filtration system will best address that particular issue. Almost all water treatment systems are self-cleaning and must have a specific minimum flow rate. Common problem is to use a water treatment system that will require certain gallons per minute, but the existing well pump produces less than what the treatment system requires. So you got to make sure that matches up, right? Water pressure is also a factor in choosing a water treatment system for well water. Nearly all water treatment systems will decrease the water pressure as the water goes through the equipment. That's something to keep in mind too. If your water pressure is already on the low end and you're putting in a filtration system, is it going to make it too low to where you can't even get your hair clean in the shower? Not that I have a lot of hair, but for folks that do, that's a consideration right there. So um, that's just like a high level overview for well situations here. Let's do this real quick. I am going to check in on our chat, see how that looks. All right, nice. Looks like we're all caught up on the chats there. Beautiful. All right, so for Colorado, there's a website, dwr.state.co.us. Well permits. You can dive in there and look up the address to look up the well permits for that property. That's dwr.state.co.us. Awesome. Cool. All right. Let's move on from that topic because I had some really good questions about someone that was considering renting out their property versus selling. And there's pros and cons to each here. Um, General rule of thumb from a long term perspective, I'm of the opinion that it's always better to hold on to that property. That's not something that you think that you would hear from a realtor, but I'm just being real with you. You want to hold on to that property because of the benefits of owning the property from a tax perspective as well as cash flow. If you're able to rent that out and cover your expenses for that property, even if you're just breaking even, you're able to set aside, and we'll cover exactly what that entails. I'm not talking about just paying the mortgage because there's more expenses that come with being a landlord. But from a high level overview, if you're covering maintenance, if you're covering vacancy, if you're covering property management fees, and your holding costs for that, insurance, taxes, all that good stuff, and you're in a position to where you don't need to sell that property to get your next one, hang on to it. I, that's going to be awesome for you right there, because they're going to be paying down your mortgage if you have a mortgage on it. Each rent check that you get and you make your mortgage payment, you're paying it down. And then the property, especially here in Colorado with the appreciation rates the way they are, so much better to hang on to that property and realize those long-term gains when you can go and sell the property in a few years for much more than what you could sell it for today. That's the way that the market is headed right now. It might not be headed at quite a crazy angle as it was here in 2022, with rates have ticked up a little bit. So maybe things are slowing down, but it's by no means shifted to a buyer's market. Properties aren't losing value, they're still gaining value. So at this point in the game, hang on to those properties, right? So, but again, it depends on you and your unique situation. There's no one answer fits all here. So if you needed the equity out of that property to be able to buy your next one, maybe it does benefit you more to go ahead and list that property for sale and get out of it. Maybe you're just tired of hanging on to that property. It's been in your family for years, or what have you. Whatever your situation is, the answer is going to vary there. But from a very general, broad, one size fits all perspective, if you have the option to hang on to it and be a landlord, um, you're gonna realize some gains there in the long term. But what does it mean to be a landlord? That's kind of what I wanted to dive in to with you guys today. So, renting out your property here. First thing you want to do is figure out how much you're going to charge for rent. How do we determine that? Call Joe Ausmus. He'll figure it out for you. Um, what I do when folks ask me how much they can rent their place for is I go out and I find rent comps. Comps being comparable listings. So I'll find similar properties in that market, similar square footage, condition, that are already being rented out and or being offered to be rented out, and see how much that they're going for. You get 4 or 5 of those, you've got a good little range there. You think you kind of know what the market is. Also consider this: if they have the rent on there too high and it's been sitting on, they haven't been able to rent the property out. That's something to consider too. Just because they're asking, 3 grand a month for the property doesn't mean that that's what renters are willing to pay for that property. If they can rent one down the street for 2,200, right? So it's all relative there. But that's how we do it. You do your homework there, look at the rent comps, look at the ones that are getting rented out rather quickly, and what they're going for, and that's how we kind of determine what would be a good range to put you in. And I always put it in terms of range instead of saying this is how much this property will rent for, choosing like the middle number. Why do we do that? Because the next question is, how risk tolerant are you when it comes to being a landlord? Do you want a ton of applicants to choose from, and you can be really choosy about the ones that have the most steady jobs, longest job time, best credit scores? Or do you want to charge more for rent and maybe only get a handful of applications, and that's your choices? Because those are the only folks willing to pay what you're asking for. So no one can decide that by you, by the way. You have to decide, which end of the spectrum are you on, or are you in the middle? You're like, you know what, I want the best of both worlds. I want a decent amount of choices here in terms of tenants, but I also don't want to leave money on the table. So, all right, we've got that figured out. We've got our rental range. We've figured out, how much risk we want to take on there, how many applicants that we want to try to pull in here. Now you're going to list it. Well, are you going to snap a couple of photos on your iPhone and put them on Zillow, or are you going to hire a pro. My beautiful, lovely wife, Lindsay Ausmus, is my in-house pro photographer. I always recommend, even if you're just doing a rental, to have professional shots because it goes a long way. That's going to get more interest in your property, whether you're selling or renting it. And it's worth its weight in gold there in terms of hiring a pro to get those photos done for you, right? You want more eyes, more exposure, more interest always in your listing. That's going to give you a best outcome regardless of what you're trying to do with that property. So in terms of exposure, definitely recommend to list it on Zillow. That's a great tool. I think a lot of renters start their search there, and there's possibly some other sites that you want to dive into as well. Um, Apartments.com. I don't know if you can list houses on there necessarily, but perhaps a condo or a townhome. So those are just some places that you want to check out. What are some other sites that I can list my rental on besides the big one being Zillow? So next thing to consider is tenant screening. What is tenant screening? Um, you want to receive their applications, and what I recommend is to complete a background check on anyone you're putting into your property, verify income. I recommend to require an income of at least 3 times the monthly rent. So you want to make sure they can afford it, even if they have an expense that comes up. You want to make sure that you're not the one holding the bag, because guess what? You got to pay your mortgage whether your tenant's paying you or not. So the better you can stack the odds in your favor as a landlord to make sure that you're getting those timely checks, better off you'll be. How we doing? Let's check in on these chats. Okay. Everyone's just kind of diving in and listening to the material. That's great. Cool. We got thumbs up. I'll give you thumbs up as well. Appreciate you guys checking out the live here. This is all recorded, by the way, so it's going up on my YouTube channel afterwards. Definitely subscribe to the channel because it'll notify you every time I go live, as well as when I post videos. I'm planning to dive into a lot more video content this year that's not these live streams, but doing some fun stuff related to things to do in Colorado, the music scene in Colorado, as well as real estate resources. So this is kind of devoted to real estate resources here, to Ask a Realtor, but we're definitely going to have a lot going on the channel. So that's my little plug. Let's get back to Landlord 101. So cool, tenant screening. You're verifying income, you're doing a background check. You may want to consider doing a credit check as well, make sure that there are credit-worthy candidates in there. Again, this is your property, so you want to protect yourself. Some landlords might have a huge portfolio and they can afford an eviction or two. If this is your only one or your first one, an eviction could break you. It's very expensive, takes a very long time, and it's super not fun. So anything you can do on the front end to circumvent that, highly recommended. Other consideration here, your timeline. How soon do you need it to be rented? If you've got a house sitting vacant and you got bills to pay and really need that thing rented out sooner than later, you might consider pricing it on the lower end to get someone in there quicker. If you're in the others, flip those tables and you have a little time to sit on it and you're like, you know what, I want to take my time, find the right tenant for the right rental price. Great, more power to you. But just make sure you're considering that. The timeline might be longer if you're taking a little bit longer. Review those rent comps that we talked about. If it's been on there, on Zillow 3 days, or has it been on there 150 days, right? It's all relative there. So just make sure that you are asking the important questions up front and have answers prepared for those. That's kind of what this segment is devoted to. Is a lot of folks are like, oh, great, I'd love to rent out a place, get that mailbox money. there's a lot that goes into it. You find out that property management is very much a full-time job. So diving back into here, will you allow pets? How many, what size, breed restrictions? Are there breed restrictions in the city or subdivision that you live in? That's important information to know as a landlord. You might allow a renter in there, and then the HOA comes through and says, "Oh, we don't allow that breed of dog in our community. They've got to get rid of the dog or move out." Then you've got possible turnover there. You allowed it in your lease. It's a mess. Don't mess with it. Do your homework up front. Know what's allowed. Know what you will allow, and make sure that it's very clear in your lease. Which segues into your lease. You need a lease. Are you going to jump out online and download a lease off of Google? You can certainly do that. Are you going to have an attorney draft a lease for you, or at least have an attorney review and make notes and corrections on that lease that you downloaded online? Because keep in mind with this that the laws around landlord-tenant relationship are always changing. Actually, I had a annual commission update course this morning. For my real estate license, I'm required to do 4 hours of annual commission update education every single year. And the reason why is it pertains to not only guys that do sales like myself, but also property managers who hold the same broker license. And they've made some changes with the law regarding late fees. So late fees now have to be no more than $50 or 5% of that monthly rent. And there's a lot of laws around how late fees can be collected. So if you've got a tenant that owes back rent and they submit their rent payment to you, guess what? You can't take your late fee out of that and then have them be short on their rent. You have to apply that as your rent if that is their rent payment. And that means even if you're not getting those late fees paid, honestly, at that point, you're lucky to get your back rent, right? But it's one of those things that the laws have been adjusted. There's been, case studies where landlords were abusing late fees and hurting their tenants with it. So, the Colorado Real Estate Commission stepped in, made some changes there. So these are important things to know as a landlord. I think that was probably your question there. No, your question is about standard or general rules regarding rent increases. Got it. So what you're talking about is like a rent control situation. And if you're in a place with rent controls, absolutely. We see it a lot in big urban places. New York City comes to mind. I always think of the show Friends, where they're at the end, they're like, we're so thankful for rent controls in this city that made this place a steal for us, right? But as far as rent increases go from month to month, I mean, I've seen them triple from one lease to the next here in Denver, and that was not that long ago. So, landlords can charge what they want. Is it right that they can? Well, triple is kind of a big deal there. But yeah, it really depends on the local ordinances. So that's a great question, sir. Boom. All right. And then, so we've got our lease drafted. You might have an attorney review it. That might cost you $300-500 to have the attorney do it. Well worth it, in my opinion. Just to make sure that they're addressing all the stuff that you maybe do not know about if you're a new landlord. And same thing with your application. 3 thumbs up, man. That's what's up. I don't even have a third thumb to give you, but Here, boom. Yeah, buddy. Nice. Same thing with your application. You can download one online. Um, you probably don't need an attorney to draft one necessarily, but look at a couple. Make sure that it includes everything that you want it to. Um, you might consider hiring a property manager to just handle this whole process for you. Process of listing it, screening tenants, doing the applications, getting them in there. Um, well worth it. If you're not wanting to take on the full-time job of property management, to just let them handle the process. Some of them charge you a month's worth uh, of their fee, around 10% of the monthly rent for the step, depending on who you use. So if you're self-managing, be ready to field calls and start setting up showing appointments. Send completed apps for credit and background screening. Choose an applicant and send them a lease to sign, and then collect the security deposit. Will you? And then how are you going to collect that? By the way, you're going to use Venmo or are you going to use another service? Um, let's see here. You want to, and if you're self-managing, who will handle repairs? You, or do you have a trusted handyman? Also, you've got their, signed lease, security deposit. You want to have a move in, move out checklist done. And I recommend to take photos of condition at move in, compare to move out when you're deciding what to charge slash withhold from that security deposit. And keep this in mind too. I'm going to ask this question: who is it that decides if something is just considered normal wear and tear or if it's considered damage? The answer to that question is the judge, the magistrate. It's not you, it's not the tenant. You can subjectively say, oh, that carpet's torn up over there. I'm going to charge my tenant for it. That's damage. The judge might rule that as wear and tear, depending on how old the carpet was when they moved in, what the condition looked like. So it's something to be cautious and cognizant about when you're deciding to charge your tenants for anything at move out, right? Um, just really make sure you ask yourself, is this truly damage, or is this going to be construed in the court as wear and tear? And the answer may surprise you. Awesome. So what else? So we've collected a security deposit. We've got a signed lease. We've done move in, move out checklist, walk through with the tenant, have them sign off on the condition up front. We've got our photos. Now the next step is to get paid on the regular. All right. Recommend to set aside 10% of the rent for maintenance or capital expenditures, because stuff breaks into houses and your tenants are going to want it fixed. Don't be that landlord. Just do me and everyone else a favor. Don't be that landlord. Make sure that you got this stuff set aside so that you can take care of your tenants. All right. So if you take care of your tenants, I firmly believe that your tenants will take care of you. Keep records for taxes and books, right? That security deposit I mentioned earlier, by the way, I highly recommend to just open a different bank account to hold that guy in. Don't do what we call in the industry is commingle the funds. Actually, real estate licensees can get in trouble and get our license even pulled for commingling funds. So when we act as property managers, we are required to have a non-interest bearing account, escrow account set up for those security deposits. And if we're managing several properties, then we may be required to have several different accounts set up for each one, for each tenant that we're holding security deposits for. And it's set up that way by design, to make sure that those funds are not being commingled, to make sure that the landlord's not saying, oh, there was a bunch of damage, so I'm not going to pay you back. Well, the real reason is that they went ahead and spent that security deposit, right? They don't have any money to give you back when you move out. So again, just don't be that guy. Set it aside, set it and forget it. You're getting your rent from them. That's fine. That money is not your money. That is their money that you are holding on to. It is just that, a security deposit. Um, great, great, cool. And then what to do if they're late? Have a clear policy in your lease. Excessive late violations. Have an eviction attorney on hand to consult / complete eviction steps for you. Again, good tenant screening up front will minimize this risk. An eviction can cost tens of thousands between missed rent and court costs. So I want to point you to a resource here. Wrap this one up. We're going a little bit longer on this one, but I'm fired up talking about all this crazy real estate. So we're sitting at about 45 minutes here. Beautiful. If you guys got questions, by the way, fire them at me. But the resource I want to point you guys to, if you're considering being a landlord, if you are a landlord, there is a great website called biggerpockets.com. They've got blogs, podcasts, forums, just for investors and landlords. They have tenant screening tools. They have rental calculators. Great resource. If you want me to send you some of that stuff, if you want me to send you the link I told you about for looking up well permits, I'm happy to do it. Shoot me a message and I'll hook you guys up. Great. Let me check back in on the chat here before we wrap it up here. Just make sure there's no additional questions. But that's really all I had for you here. Again, we're going to keep rolling every single week. Next week, episode 5, rocking and rolling. So send me some topics that you would like me to chat about here on the channel, and I'll work them into the Ask a Realtor segments. Appreciate you guys logging in and checking it out. Or if you're checking it out after the fact, no longer live, in the future of the recording, still appreciate you spending your time checking this out. I hope you got some valuable information out of today. Make it a good one. Talk to you later.